So, wir sind live. Ja, schönen guten Abend an euch. Wir freuen uns auf jeden Fall sehr, heute den Livestream mit euch und vor allen Dingen natürlich mit Imperial Yeast heute Abend zu haben. Wir haben die Nina als Gast und später kommt auch noch die Liz dazu. Die werden uns dann ziemlich viel über Hefe erzählen. Ich freue mich schon sehr darauf. Ich bin Dave und genau, ich würde sagen, we're now switching back to English so Nina can understand us. How is it going, Nina?
Good. Thank you so much for having us here today. I think Liz said she was going to pop in here in a second, but we're really glad to be here and be able to chat some yeast today.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I was really stoked when you said you want to join, and yeah. So I'm just reaching out to the people. So also wenn ihr schon irgendwelche Fragen habt, auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch, ich kann es gerne übersetzen, das ist kein Problem. Natürlich vorzugsweise in Englisch, falls es geht, aber wenn nicht, kriegen wir das auch auf jeden Fall irgendwie übersetzt. Oh yeah, Liz is there. I will just invite her to go on the screen. All right. Let's see if it works.
So many people all up at once. Oh, you have to be able to invite her for her screen to come up too.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it. You control all of the things.
Yeah, that was actually a struggle in the first place.
Hey. I was like, I'm in here, but I don't know how to see. I don't know how to be in here.
No worries, you figured it. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us. I was just jumping in and listening to everything that's been going on so far, and deciphering my German, which I don't know a lot of, but doing my best.
That's all right. I guess we will sort it out anyway, and we try to keep it in English as much as possible. So yeah. All right. So you've been busy lately, right? With getting out new yeast strains, I think.
Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy last couple of months, especially with the pandemic. I'm not sure how it's impacted for you over in Germany, but we've had a lot of logistical things to overcome, a lot of homebrew shops and a lot of breweries that have been impacted. And so if there's anything that holds true, though, it's that people still want to be drinking no matter what.
Yeah.
So
yeah, cheers to that.
Yeah, all the time. So homebrewing has been really, really big, and it's been great to really spend some time chatting with homebrewers and hearing what people are wanting from their yeast lately and what things they're brewing. So today, while we have our presentation, it's mostly to be showing you how our process goes for our propagation. And we'll talk a little bit about some easy quality control tests that you can perform at home. And we're also here to answer questions along the way. So it seems like it'll probably be easiest, maybe, David, if people do have questions, to write them in, and you can either interrupt me while we're doing the presentation, or we can save them to the end and we'll try to get to all of them.
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, I would love to welcome any questions, and I guess we just see how it goes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whenever we're ready to get started, I'll turn on my screen share here, so you'll be able to see my screen. But we want to make sure, how many people are we expecting to jump in today?
Actually, I'm not very sure about this. I mean, it's Friday night and it's pretty hot in here, so it's over 30 C. I guess it's around 88 Fahrenheit or something.
Yeah. Wow. That's
yeah. But actually, where I live in the south of Germany at Lake of Constance, the weather seems to be better than in other areas in Germany. So yeah, I'm not sure how the other areas are going.
It's raining at my house right now, which is weird because it's been very hot, like 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit the last couple of days. So
yeah, I'm actually happy it's raining right now. It's super refreshing because it was so hot.
Yeah, it's also been hot around here. I guess tomorrow it will be a little bit colder, which I really welcome because yeah, it's really hard to not start to sweat with like just breathing.
Yeah. Definitely.
But, we'll see if anyone else jumps in while we get started, but I can go ahead and share my screen here.
Sure.
Know if you guys have any problems seeing it. One sec. Do that. Can we see?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Oh, yeah, I think I need to focus this screen here. Yeah, that looks better.
Good.
I think that should be good, right?
Yeah. Can you see my Imperial Yeast logo?
I can see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Good deal. Okay. Well, jumping into it then. One thing that we really enjoyed doing before COVID pandemic time was anytime anyone was visiting Portland, Oregon, we had an open lab that you could come and take a tour of. So what we'd like to do today is it's not going to be exactly the same as having it in person, but I will give you a little walkthrough with some photos so you can have an idea of what our propagation process is like from start to finish. And you'll use your imagination a little bit along the way, but I'll share as much as I can with you. So a bit about Imperial Yeast is our company. We've been around since 2014 at this point, and we're based out of Portland, Oregon on the West Coast. And we actually have a second location that we're having underway in Philadelphia that is supposed to be ready to move into in the next couple of months so we can start our next shipping location out of there. And that will be really great, especially for our European customers, because shipping charges are already pretty outrageous for having to get perishable liquid yeast internationally. So even just being 3,000 miles closer and being able to ship out of an East Coast facility should really help get our presence out there. That will be hopefully both on the commercial and on the retail front. So we're really looking forward to that. But otherwise, we've been in Portland. That's where all of our production and our shipping happens. So maybe one day when things are safe to travel again, if you're ever able to make it to one of our facilities, we'll be able to share our little tour with you.
Or we can go to Germany.
Oh, you can come to Germany.
I'd love to. I'm like, yeah, visit us, but like, let us come. We'll come visit Germany.
Yeah,
we'll say it's a work trip.
Exactly.
You're welcome anytime. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm gonna hold you to that. Well, so on our pretend visit here, I'm going to pretend like all of you are in the room with me in person. If I were taking you through our tour of our Portland lab, the very first place that I would start is this laboratory. Now, on site, we have a negative 80 degrees Celsius freezer that we store all of our mother cultures in. So last time we had checked, we were sitting around just over 200 different strains in the bank.
Wow.
And we're not propagating all of those every single day. A lot of them are just different strains that we have collected because people have submitted them to us for banking. They might be proprietary strains that are specific for our commercial customers. They have come from wild capture projects. They've come out of bottles of beer. They've come from other labs. So we have a lot of different sources for those strains. But generally what we're doing at the lab is we're propagating our 27 plus a seasonal core strains. So that's what ends up in homebrew pouches and is available on our commercial side. So when we're ready to start these propagations, our lab will go into the freezer and take just a very small sterile loop of cells to get started in a little start tube. So it's just a couple of cells and a very small quantity of media. And from there, it's going to be a series of small propagations to work it up into a flask that can go into production. So we'll start with a little small start tube. We'll go up into a working slant, and then we'll end up in flasks, just as a very small step-by-step propagation. So
actually, oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I just got a question beforehand. So how many cells do we got as mother cells? Because I was wondering, if you're just pulling out, would you still be able to do that for maybe just like 30 years or something?
Yeah, we're taking such a small quantity from those starts that we're not anticipating running out anytime soon. And in addition to the freezer that we have on site at our Portland location, we have a backup freezer. So we have bits of all of those off-site. So in case the apocalypse really does hit, or the power goes out, or we've got our backup generator fail, you'll still be able to produce yeast. So no fear. Yeah, so we should be good for a very long time.
Sounds good to me, yeah.
So our lab that's kind of our first step of propagation. At the end of propagation, we'll return to the lab and talk about what they do once we have our mass quantities of slurry. But once we have our yeast built up into flasks, we're ready to go into our production space. Now, if you've ever been in a standard commercial brewery, it's going to look pretty similar to what we have going on in ours. We've got those conical tanks that range from 1 barrel all the way up to 30 barrel size systems. We've got our brew stand that is a little bit different than what your standard brew kettle is going to look like, but we're doing basically the same thing. We're brewing the same exact boring beer over and over and over again. And it's not to be making anything delicious. It's only to be feeding the yeast.
Yeah.
So here's a good look at what our production facility is looking like closer to these days. This photo was actually taken about a year ago, and since then we've filled in a lot of that space with even more 30-barrel tanks. We've got a lot of A38 juice to make for people, so we had to have more. But what differentiates our process from that of a standard brewery is, for one, we don't handle any raw grain in-house. So from a raw material standpoint, we're using only DME, sugar, and yeast nutrient, and they're all organic. And our kettle that you can see a picture of in the left corner of this screen isn't a traditional open top kettle. It actually functions more like a pressure cooker. So when we're ready to make our big batches of media to be feeding all of our tanks, we take all of our sterile ingredients. So that includes very sterile water that has gone through multiple different filters to get it as sterile as possible. We'll blend that in with our DME, our sugar, our yeast nutrient, and everything will go inside this pressure cooker that comes up to 240 degrees Fahrenheit and 10 pounds of pressure. So what ends up is we have a very sterile wort media on our hands that we can use to feed each of the tanks. So if we were going to propagate a 30-barrel tank of A38 juice, which we do pretty regularly on a weekly basis, we would start by taking that start inoculation flask from the lab, and we would pitch it to one of these tanks. And on the first day, we would be adding about 30 liters of that sterile media. And we would let that go overnight. And then on day 2, we would be adding another about 300 liters of media. On day 3, we would add another 3,000 liters of media. And then at that point, we're just letting the fermentation ride out to completion We're hitting terminal gravity right around 2 Plato, so pretty standard across the board. You can also see in this photo the small blue hoses that are dropping down to each tank. Those are all hooked up to individual regulators for oxygen. So every strain is going to have slightly different oxygen needs. And as soon as those tanks have hit terminal and they're done fermenting, we'll make sure that we can cut the air and that we'll be able to just go ahead and crash it like a regular tank. So dropping that temperature, so all of those cells will drop out.
And how big is the first flask that you would pitch into the tank?
It depends on what size tank we're going into, but it could be 1 flask if we're starting really small. It could be multiple flasks if we're starting a little bit bigger. But it depends on the strain and the size batch that we're going to be producing.
So I guess the King and the A37 POC will be like a little bit more going like into a bigger volume at first, because you don't need to pitch them in a like lager yeast pitching rate.
We don't necessarily do anything different with our procedure for the Kveik. We still treat those strains with the same pitch rates as any of our ales. So we're not really trying to drive any sort of flavor production or aroma production. We're just putting them in their ideal conditions for growth. So that means not anything outrageous of temperatures, and we're not going to expose them to any sort of stress with an underpitch. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, most of the time when people are handling those Kveik strains, they'll expose them to different stressors, whether it's under pitching or wild temperatures, to get them to produce certain ester profiles. And we're just worried about getting them to grow in their happy environment.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Nina, you got the distilling question. If we should make beer and turn it into liquor.
It has.
We get that question pretty often. I see it here in the chat.
At this point, it would require for us a little bit more labor than we're really able to put in at the moment, in addition to some other permits. So we get some workarounds right now where we're not really producing alcohol. We're a food manufacturing facility, so we don't have to deal with any of the licensing for producing alcohol, but maybe one day. For the most part, the distillate, I think any of the byproduct, everything gets dumped down the drain because it is really quite gross. It just tastes like a lot of yeast byproduct. So any strain that you might have known to produce a lot of sulfur or diacetyl, it's just that media is gonna taste like that. So when we're
I'm just sorry. There were another 2 questions from Bernd. So the first is, as far as I know, the pitch rates 1 pack offers are appropriate for a single batch of 20 to 25 liters at least for top fermented beers. Have is it with lagers? Do I need 2 packs? Did you do experiments if one can ferment with 1 pack? Does it have any impact versus 2 packs?
Yeah, we can go over pitch rates a little bit more in depth, but as a general rule, so we pack 200 billion cells into each of those pouches, which is generally appropriate for a 5-gallon or 19-20 liter batch. Now, we recommend pitching the whole thing to really either ale or lager, and you can have some great results. And this is because we took all of the average starting gravities for most styles of ales and most styles of lagers. And in general, your ales are going to start at just slightly higher gravity than most traditional lager recipes do. And so you're going to end up with a slightly higher pitch rate for your lagers with a lower starting gravity if you're looking at it from the number of cells per milliliter per degree Plato. So for a standard ale pitching rate that's recommended and just recognized as an industry standard, you'd be shooting around 0.75 million cells per mil per degree Plato. And that would be averaging around a 14 Plato starting gravity. Whereas let's say your lagers are starting around 10 to 11 degrees Plato, you'd be getting closer to about a 1 million cells per mil per degree Plato. That's a lot of numbers that are thrown out there, but it simplifies things. You can also go onto our website. We have a pitch calculator where you can enter your batch size and your starting gravity, and it will spit out how many pouches you would ideally use. But for the most part, if you're just working with standard gravity, you can pitch 1 pouch with great results without having to build a starter or pitch 2 pouches.
Actually, I did a lager with LO9 Bueno that had around 9 Plato, and I was curious to see what would happen if I would just pitch like 1 pouch into the wort, and it was 24 liters or so, so just like a slightly higher than a 5-gallon batch, and it just fermented out fine. I mean, it took a little bit longer to get going, but in the end, it was a very, very fine beer. So yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's exactly what we go for with it, that we've designed those pouches so you don't have to be building a starter for every single batch that you do, whether it's an ale or a lager. It's just so much more fun if you can get straight to the brewing part.
Definitely, yeah. So there was another question from Bernd. I don't know if you can see those.
I can't when I'm in my full screen right now. Or maybe...
Okay.
No, I don't think. Wait, maybe I can.
I can see the questions
Okay.
in here.
All right.
So it's up to you. You can read it or I can read it. You did so well reading the first one.
Okay, then I'll just go ahead. All right. All right. Bernd also asked, are the propagating temperatures the same as the recommended temperatures we brewers use for fermentation? What temperature do you use for L17 harvest, for example?
Yeah, so most of our strains are fermented in the low 70s and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, between 70 and 75. And this is true for even lagers because we're not trying to, like I mentioned with the Kveik's, we're not trying to do anything necessarily with our flavor profile. We're just putting them in their ideal situation for growth. So we do ferment. There are a couple of Belgian strains. I don't think any that end up in pouches necessarily, but we've got a couple of commercially available ones that will end up, they just prefer a little bit warmer temperatures, but we don't propagate our lager strains at lagering temperatures. We're just getting them in the space where they are to have a healthy growth cycle, and that's around 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
All right. Okay, thanks. Okay,
those the existing questions for now?
No, I think not. So if you want, you can continue.
Keep going. All right. Interrupt me if there's more. I like questions. It's good.
All right.
So where we were leaving off in our process here was right when our slurry has finished fermenting and we're ready to harvest all of that yeast out of tank. So we'll go through our crash. So we'll bring that temperature down, and then it can be a little strain dependent how long it can take to actually harvest all of that slurry. So I'm sure from the homebrew perspective, you've experienced before that some strains have different flocculation characteristics. And so some of these strains are really nice and easy to work with, and they'll all drop out nicely to the bottom and you can harvest them in one pull, essentially. Other strains are going to be a little feistier, where they might be a little stubborn and want to stick up higher to the sides, like the walls of the tank. They can be a little bit chunkier and slower to move. So strains like B44 Whiteout, G01 Stefan, those generally can take 2 to 3 days to get a full harvest from. So we don't want to rush it, go as slow as we can to really maximize how much slurry we're able to get out of one of those tanks.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a process for sure. It can be time consuming. But once we do have that slurry, we'll send it back to the laboratory for our final blending and counting and quality control. So here we have a picture of Kendra using our cell counting software. And this is so they don't have to be hunched over microscopes all day long. It really simplifies the process for making sure that we're hitting our cell counts. And so they're able to take a small sample of slurry and add dyes to fluoresce in 2 different colors. So we're able to easily view the number of live cells versus the number of dead cells and get a count from the grid on the screen. It can be a little tricky with some strains that have higher flocculation characteristics, like A09 pub. When you put that strain on a slide, all of those cells just want to clump together. If you've ever brewed anything with A09 pub, you've probably noticed that that strain has a consistency that's very chunky and like cottage cheese. And that's because all of those cells are going to want to come and clump together pretty rapidly. So it can be a little challenging for cell counting, but using this in conjunction with a regular microscope will usually yield us some pretty good results.
Yeah, A09 really drops out like a rock. Really nice strain.
Yeah, for basically every step of our process when we're dealing with A09 pub needs a little special care. Even pouching, it can be really tricky because it just all wants to drop out to the bottom of the container when they're trying to put it in pouches. So it can be tricky.
A09 doesn't want to be pouched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, our lab is also responsible for maintaining our quality control. And so here's some examples of the differential media plates that they're using at different points during the propagation to make sure that we're not getting any sort of infection. So we're going to be looking for common beer spoilers. We want to make sure that the Saccharomyces strains we have are pure cultures that are not contaminated with lactobacillus or with Brettanomyces, and vice versa, because we do have other cultures that we're using in-house. Generally, we don't have too many issues because we're very diligent about tracking lots from and tracking tanks and making sure that nothing is going to be handled get any sort of crossover in handling process. But this is like our final checkpoint to make sure that there's no infection.
So how do you...
You guys hear my cat right now?
Yeah. Your cat wants to talk yeast.
Yeah, it sure does.
Why not? So these this device that you can see in the picture, how would you account for not getting an infection as well? I mean, how would you sterilize it or sanitize it?
Yeah, basically every piece of equipment that we use in-house goes through a giant autoclave, or we have a couple of giant autoclaves. So we can really put anything in there at very, very high heat for long periods of time and pull it out, and it should come out as very sterile. So that's almost entirely one person's job for an entire day, is just collecting parts that have been used and preparing them to go into the autoclave.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, very sterile parts. So in this picture, they're loading some samples onto some different media to see what grows. Some of those plates are going to inhibit certain types of growth. Others are going to promote certain types of growth. So they'll be able to see very easily what grows on those that should either be there or not. So that's helpful for like looking at Brettanomyces. It helps determine if there's any diastaticus variant strains that show up where they shouldn't. We do have a couple of strains that are known to be STA1 positive variants of Saccharomyces, which really just means that they have got a genetic coding that makes them prone for re-fermentation. So it's great for commercial customers to know that kind of information about whatever strain they're handling, because if they have diastaticus strains where they don't want them, it could end up re-fermenting their beer once it's already hit package, and that could be a pretty big issue. So we're always testing for that as well.
Just another question.
Yeah.
How would you, if you got some yeast blends like Viking, so would you just propagate each cell or each strain in this blend on its own and then blend them together at packaging, or would you rather propagate them all together so they get used to the other cultures? I don't know.
It depends on the blend, actually. That's a really good question. Viking, those 3 strains, they're a culture on their own, and we grow them all in the same tank. They all pretty much have the same needs, and they'll grow at approximately the same rate. So they're all totally fine growing together. We do have some other blends like our A24 dry hop, which is a blend of A04 Barbarian and A20 citrus. Those we grow up separately, and then we'll blend them together. And there is a little bit of a period where once they've been blended together, we'll let them sit to kind of acclimate. Since some strains are friendlier with each other in package than others are. Some strains have a tendency to react to one another just with slight differentiation in flocculation characteristics. pH is generally the same across the board, but it does depend on the blend. And that was a good question.
All right, thanks.
Also, Nina, there's another mention for our origins and asking about the L17 harvest being the Augustiner strain. Yes. And we can actually send you, and you can send it to share it with the whole group. We actually have a cross-reference sheet of like our strain origins. So you can, and we'd be happy to send it to you when we, after the meeting, and any questions or anything or any follow-ups, you can always email one of us. But
sure.
that covers all the pouches and inventory of up to our knowledge of where the origins are where we're getting it from. So yeah, like the L17 and Augustiner, we have a whole list.
Wow.
Yeah. I'll give it to David, and he can forward it to. He can forward it to everyone, just so when you're looking to maybe brew something particular, or just wanting to do some exploring on different strains, you can have that reference there. And I use that reference all the time, so it's super helpful.
Yeah, definitely. We would love to put it up in our shop. So I think that's helpful for all of our customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll send it your way. Well, that basically describes our start to finish process. The only part I don't really have slides on are our pouching process. It's not very glamorous to look at, though. It's really a one-person task to be able to take all of those blended carboys, like plastic carboys that our bulk yeast comes out of, and basically using a pump to get 155 mils or 200 billion cells into every single pouch, passing them through the sealer and date stamping them. So it's a long day process for one person to stand there and put that quantity into pouches, but we're grateful for it because once it's in pouches, we're able to just pop it directly into our cold storage, and then it's ready to ship out even internationally. So
Yeah.
Since we have gone through great lengths to produce this healthy yeast for you, we do have a couple of pointers for best practices to ensure the health of your yeast. So the pouches that you receive are good for 4 months from the manufacture date printed on the pouch. Anybody who's been using Imperial yeast for a long time will probably recall that we used to recommend 3 months from the manufacture date. And we recently extended that because we conducted a long-term viability study, and we were able to take samples of our strains from every single group. So we looked at the ales, lagers, Belgians, Germans, wild strains, and we were checking their viability over the course of 6 months to see what would happen. And of course, this is held at very consistent temperatures, so 34 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit for the entirety of storage, which is ideal. But all of our strains across the board at that 4 months mark, they were still all displaying at least 90% viability. So if you're used to using some of those online calculators, it can be a little tricky because they don't always take into consideration all of the different variables for how things have been handled, what kind of transit time there's been. But we do say our shelf life is 4 months from the manufacture date. That leads us into our recommendation for storing cold and pitching cold. And some other yeast manufacturers, or you might be familiar with on a brew day, where in the morning you'll pull out your yeast pouch and leave it on your counter to warm up while you're brewing. This is not a practice that we recommend. And this is because when the yeast is cold, it's in like a metabolic hibernation. So it's not going to need any food. It's not going to be active. It's not going to off gas. All of those things can happen when your yeast is in fermentation temperature wort. It's going to be the most ideal for your yeast to become active in an environment that is nutrient rich, rather than warming up and starting its processes inside a pouch where it might turn to its own sugar reserves. It might be off-gassing and building some pressure within that pouch that can be detrimental to your viability. So we're not very concerned about temperature shock as long as you're pitching into wort that is at the temperature that you would like to ferment at. Yeah,
there was a huge discussion about it, like in all kind of forums, and actually I also just like pull the pouch out when I'm ready to go, maybe just like 5 minutes or so before pitching, just to give the sanitizer a little bit ahead of time, and I never experienced any issues with that. So
yeah, and we always point out too that on the commercial side of breweries, most of the in-house yeast management will come from brewery procedures that involve repitching from tanks that are cold or have been crashed, or from cold yeast drinks. So it's not too often that commercial breweries are pitching yeast that has come up to temperature, because that could take a pretty significant amount of time. They're just pitching directly from a crash tank that they can harvest from and into the next batch. So it's totally normal and okay to just be pitching that way.
Okay, I think we got some questions coming along the way. Let's see. The first, I think, was from Micha. He asked regarding aeration. Is there a rule of thumb during our homebrewer propagation at what time to start to steam air inside the vessel, or when to start, when to stop?
Yeah, generally it can be hard because it's really difficult to take a gravity on your starter, obviously. But you'll want to cut aeration really as soon as you're feeling confident that that batch is done. So I think on our next slide here, I'll have some information on starter recommendations. But If you've got a stir plate and you're using one pouch, you could pitch that pouch into 2 liters of media and run it for 24 hours. And at that point, you would want to cut air right away. You don't want to be leaving your air on for days on end, since that can actually be not so great for the viability of your yeast.
Okay. All right. Then, yeah, we actually got another 2 questions. I think the next one is regarded me. So a question also for David about the ordering process at Hopfenomer. Delivery time is said to be up to 28 days. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's not. I guess you'll have to pack and ship them from Portland. David, how often do you order in bulk at Imperial? Actually, that would be a good question for our buy-in department for Veronica. She's also just attending right now. Maybe I'll just let her join and just to see what she has to tell about it, because I think she's a little bit more familiar, because I'm rather the brewing guy and does all the kind of brewing stuff. But I guess that would be a great question for her.
Yeah.
All right. Now it says a stream is limited to 4 simultaneous video sources. Okay, so maybe I'm not sure how we're gonna deal with that now. Would it be okay if I would just like remove one of you for a second and then just let you join back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, then just 1 second.
Remove me. Nina's the one doing the slide.
I'll just see how it goes. Just a second. Oh yeah. Close video. I think now it should work. Yep. All right. I just asked Veronica to join. Maybe she joins. Otherwise, I can also answer the question. Maybe not just in a lot of detail, but I'll surely know how things are working here. It's answered in the comment section now. Hi, Veronica.
Hi. Ich hätte jetzt nicht gedacht, dass ich so schnell mit euch reden sollte.
Yeah. Sometimes things happen fast.
Yeah, it's really fast, so no problem. I think I answered in the comments. I don't know if you see it. Some yeast we have on stock, but other ones there's not so often reordered, so we have to order it when in bulk. So I think it's in a period of 2 weeks, because with the shipping costs and so on. Also, I'm sorry, in the background there's also a carrier for hops, because we are in the middle of the hop yeast, so I'm sorry.
The hop harvest, yeah. We're starting to harvest hops right now. It smells beautiful here in Tettnang.
Yeah.
It's great. So yeah, I guess Veronica really just summed it up very good. So normally, yeah, like she said, we have some yeast that like L17 harvest that are getting sold a lot more. And some of the strains, like maybe the Belgians, are a little bit not so often sold. So we just gotta order some of these just when we got some orders from customers. So we order them from you guys out of Portland, and yeah, then it just like takes whatever time the customs and the shipping takes. And recently we had a lot of troubles with the customs, unfortunately. So yeah, sometimes it can take actually up to 1 or 2 weeks to just get like the declaration, because it's an organic product. We have to go through a very crazy procedure, and that takes a lot of time. And yeah, we are actually not be able to control that. But as soon as we got the yeast, we'll put them also in the shop and in our cooling chamber at 4C. So everything's gonna be fine. All right, I think that answers the question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
I think you can take back the other guy.
Yeah, we'll ask Liz. All right, thank you, Veronica.
No problem. You're welcome.
All right, there you go. Where is Liz?
Liz, where are you?
There is she. All right, invite on screen. There you go. I'm just getting myself a little bit of water because it's like, again, really hot here and my mouth's starting to get dry.
Take a hydration break.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe you can read the fellow question from Bernd.
Yeah.
Right.
It looks like it was another shipping question. And Nina, this is pretty clear for us. It's basically oftentimes the packs are already warm when they end up here, so the yeast hasn't been cold the whole time. How bad is that for the yeast? So I guess in transit, what the question is we know that there's ice packs in there, but when the yeast arrives and it's not warm, how does that affect the yeast?
Yeah. So generally you can really tell if something's at room temperature, it's really not the end of the world. We're most concerned if you're going to be dealing with a pouch of yeast that has been like very warm or hot or bloated. If there's any sort of like tight expansion, you'll know right away within that pouch. And that also doesn't mean that the pouch is totally unusable. It can definitely impact some viability, but if you're ever in doubt, then you can always use that pouch to build a starter, and there are still plenty of healthy cells in there. So it's always hard this time of year, especially with transit, because it just gets so hot that sometimes it's not the best thing for your liquid yeast to be hanging out. Even with an ice pack, it can be really tricky. And fortunately, it's a small window of time when we're really concerned about it. But I guess in summary, like a room temperature pouch, if you receive that and put it right in your fridge, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. It's when you have some hot or expanded yeast that you would really want to be either doubling up on your pitch or using that to build a starter. I hope that helps.
Yeah, if it's visibly, if there's visible like inflation or bloating due to it warming up in transit, then definitely do a starter. But yeah, like Nina was saying, just to piggyback, that doesn't mean like you can't use the yeast. It's just for viability, ensuring that we highly recommend doing a starter before you pitch it.
Actually, I just used a very blown up package. Yeah, just recently.
You pitched directly?
I pitched directly because I really just wanted to see what would happen. And it took a lot of time, like 24 hours for 838 juice to really start showing signs of fermentation. But I'm pretty sure if I would have done a starter, it would be like just like regular, like within 12 hours or so. That was what I experienced with Imperial yeast a lot of time, like lag time was just below 12 hours, even for the lager strains, which is quite awesome. So, yeah. Is
the 838 ready? Did you notice any flavor differences when you use the bloated pouch in comparison to a typical non-inflated? That's just for my curiosity.
Yeah, actually, I started smelling the yeast because I was curious if it would smell different, but no, it was like just a yeasty smell with a little bit of fruitiness, and yeah. But I think the batch will be also turning out fine. It's just like, yeah, it was really, really curious to see what would happen.
Yeah. Most of the time it's really a security measure that we recommend building starters for your optimal performance, but you can certainly pitch yeast that have been bloated like that and see what happens. We're not concerned about infection. You're not going to have anything else growing in that pouch. It's still just going to be yeast. You might just have fewer viable cells, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't be able to take off. But you wouldn't really necessarily get an infection from yeast itself. Where things can be a little tricky is if you do have those extended lag times, that is a window of opportunity that is more prone to infection. It depends on your sanitation practices, but you're welcome to pitch. It's your yeast. You can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's good information as well. Glad you had some success with it. It's always good.
Yeah, me too.
But if you are doing starters, and we touched on this briefly, but this would just have a slide devoted to it. Situations in which that we always would recommend building a starter would be if your gravity is over 1070 or 17 Plato. If you have a batch that's larger than 5 gallons or 19 to 20 liters. Older pouches, a swollen pouch, a pouch that has been frozen and then thawed will also be impacted in terms of viability. So you can use those pouches to build a starter as well.
So in terms of speaking starter, would you recommend if it's just like 1 liter starter, but it's stirred and with lots of air and nutrients? So would you say 1 liter is also still enough to get a nice growth rate?
It's not ideal due to the number of cells that we start with in pack. So another yeast supplier that might start with 100 billion cells, that's great for 1 liter because there's going to be enough food to feed all of those cells to let them go through their complete growth cycle. Since we start with 200 billion cells, that's a lot of cells to be feeding. So that's why we recommend a slightly bigger starter to make sure that there's enough nutrients for everyone to go around. The risk if you have a smaller starter than that is that not every single yeast cell might have the opportunity to go through its replication cycle.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Bernd also asked, I like to cold crash starters for about 24 hours. Any best practices?
If you cold crash and decant, that's totally fine, especially if you're not going to use it right away. You can also pitch the whole starter when you're ready to. Really, either process is going to work just fine for you.
Okay. All right.
Now, I always touch a little bit on harvesting, just in case anybody, I mean, we're a yeast lab, and as our owner likes to say, you should probably just buy a new pouch from us every time. It would be
for us too.
Harvest, yeah, exactly. But yeah, harvesting and repitching, if that is something that you like to use in your brewing process, it's a really great way to get to know your strains and just add another dimension to brewing for you. So if you do harvest and repitch, we always recommend just making sure your practices are very sanitary. Harvest off of your yeast cake as soon as you really can. You don't want to just be leaving your yeast slurry at room temperature for an extended amount of time. You'll want to get that slurry refrigerated really as soon as you can when you've hit terminal gravity on your batch. So that could mean just storing it in a sanitized mason jar, something airtight that will go in your refrigerator. When you're ready to repitch, the guidelines are generally 200 to 300 grams of slurry per 5 gallons, which is a little bit more than what we provide in our pouches because we're accounting for any sort of other trube or hot material or anything that might be adding a little bit of weight and density to that slurry. That said, you don't want to sit on your harvested slurry for very long. Hours to days can be great. Weeks to months, it's probably either time to buy another pouch or build a starter or just buy another pouch from your local homebrew shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. For storage purposes too, if you wanted to do a sterile rinse for your slurry, just taking some boiled and cooled water, mixing that up with your slurry and shaking it and let it settle out, you'll see those stratified layers where you're going to have your nice smooth slurry at the bottom, and then you'll have some bigger particulate that might settle up towards the top. You can always decant that off. And that's always nice for your slurry, just to have it at a more stable pH for longer term storage.
Okay, just a question about that. What about the osmotic pressure on the yeast when you would rinse it with water?
If you're going to use that method, we always recommend decanting off whatever other kind of trube or hop material you might get out of that. Otherwise, it's not going to be too much of a concern. We use also water as part of our media if we're needing to dilute our density at all to be hitting our volumes. So we're not too concerned about that.
Okay, that's great to know.
I wouldn't put like gallons of water on top of your little bit of slurry, but a little bit in there is going to be totally fine.
Doesn't hurt it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right.
So a couple of tests, and just to preface this, I'll breeze through them just so you have an idea of what they're used for. And David, we can send you some of these procedures if people really want to go for the deep dive into any of these practices.
For the nerds.
Yeah, for the nerds. But these are simple tests that are pretty common in the commercial setting that are also very adaptable to the homebrew scale. And they're just nice to have access to if you're looking to bump up your beer game. Now, one that we always recommend is a VDK force test. And this is for the purpose of testing for the presence of diacetyl that might show up in your finished beer. So this might be relevant to you if you're having issues with tasting diacetyl in either your ales or your lagers that might show up as that buttery aroma or a little bit of slickness. There's a really easy, simple test that you can do to force those precursors out ahead of time, so you don't have to wait for them to emerge in your finished beer to realize that you have an issue. And the way it's written out here, I've actually even done it even more simply, that you don't have to pull 2 samples. You can even get away with pulling 1 sample, heat it up either with a microwave or a water bath to about 150 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll let it cool back down to room temperature, and that heating process will help force out those vicinal diketones, those precursors that will present as diacetyl when you taste it. So you'll know if you perform sensory on that sample, if you're detecting any of those buttery or slick aromas or flavors, then you can give your batch another couple of days just to hang out and clean itself up.
Wow. Actually, there's also another way that is not as scientific as your approach, which I quite like, though, is just like to rub a little bit of the beer in your hands or with your fingers, and just like start smelling it, because then you also like forcing those compounds to really build.
Yeah.
And
it's like with the heat of your hand, that makes a lot of sense. I haven't heard that before, but that absolutely makes sense.
I'm gonna try it.
Yeah, I'm gonna try that too.
I'm gonna try it the next time I brew.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, it's not ready.
So if the diacetyl shows up, would you just like rather let it sit a little bit longer on the yeast to let the yeast clean up, or?
Yeah, you can give it another day or 2. Depends on the batch. You can always reperform that test, but usually a couple of extra days can help clean that up.
All right. Thanks.
So our second test that we're going to cover here is a forced fermentation. And this test can be really great if you are brewing a higher gravity beer, or if you're brewing a recipe for your first time and you're not entirely sure what to expect your batch to finish out to. This can also help determine if any sort of under attenuation would be attributed to wort fermentability, or if it's a yeast issue. So you can always pull a very small sample at the time of getting your beer into your fermenter. pull an extra sample and add some extra yeast, whether it's some slurry that you have on hand, or if you've got dried yeast, that works just fine. You'll be able to run, it's basically like a small fermentation with loads of yeast to really force that fermentation to completion. And you'll be able to measure that sample gravity and compare it to your large batch gravity. And if those are mixed, if your batch gravity isn't going as low as what your sample gravity shows, you might have not pitched enough yeast. You might have run into some fermentation issues along the way. But it can also be an indicator just if your sample gravity doesn't get as low as you would have expected, it might actually be attributed to your wort fermentability. And that could be so many factors, as you know, mash temperatures, even the type of mill for your grain. If you've got any adjuncts with a lot of unfermentable sugars, there can be a lot of things to troubleshoot. So this test is a nice aid while you're troubleshooting anything that might be experiencing under attenuation.
Concerning attenuation of different strains, what I often did at Hopfen was just like to ferment a wort with different yeast strains, but not like what you guys did with the Insane in the Yeast Train event. That was pretty cool. By the way, I mean, I didn't get to taste the beer, but just like listening to Basic Brew Radio, that was pretty nuts. Yeah.
But doing the side by sides for sure.
Yeah, but what I just did is like fermenting with 3 different lager strains, the same kind of wort. But what I most of the time experienced is that they would ferment to the same point of attenuation. So I guess it's not like when you would compare this to a saison yeast, like a lager yeast to a saison yeast. The yeast strains are so different that they would ferment different kinds of sugar, right?
Yeah, it would. If you're going to perform that test, you would for best results, you would want to be using something pretty comparable. For that size, like sample batch, you might always have just some slight variation, but it can at least give you a ballpark if it's going to be a difference of like a few points versus a very large gap in your fermentation. You'll probably have some other signs that you've got some under attenuation on your hands as well. But yes, that's a good point, that if you're going to perform that, you'll want to use, even if it's not the exact same strain that you have on hand, something similar to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Micha also has another question regarding pitching temps of lager yeast. Oh, I can see where this is going. Many homebrewers have the problem to chill down the wort to below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Do you have any hint about pitching at higher temperatures or ferment without disturbing tastes? Or what is your opinion about chilling down the wort to pitching temperature overnight, or pitching a small amount of yeast already during the chill down? I think these are like 3 questions or something. So maybe.
Yeah, they're all related though.
Yeah.
And it really comes down, there are a lot of schools of thought surrounding what the best practice for that is, because yeah, temperature control can be a very difficult challenge, especially when brewing lagers. So if you're going to go ahead and pitch your lager strain, maybe when your wort hasn't been chilled to the temperature you want, it's going to be okay as long as you're not wildly outside your temperature range. If you're pitching 10 degrees Fahrenheit higher than what you want to be fermenting at, that's fine. You're just going to want to be chilling that as quick as you can to get to that temperature that you would like to be at for the remainder of your fermentation. But in many cases, those warmer temperatures can kind of help kickstart those fermentations to start out with. As long as you're able to cool it down in that window of time where you're not really going days on days with those warmer temperatures, because you could be producing some undesirable flavors from your lager yeast at those higher temperatures. If you do cool your yeast or cool your batch overnight and then pitch the following day, that's one method that you can do. You'll just want to make sure that your sanitation procedures are really, really buttoned up, just so you're not inviting any potential source of infection, which is actually a good point for this slide here with the wort stability test and being able to pull a little sample and incubate it and see what grows over the course of a couple of days. So if you're really confident in your sanitation practices, really either of those methods can be just fine when it comes to lagering. Did I hit all of those questions? We kind of wrapped them in one answer.
Let me just, I already marked this question as being answered, but let me just reread the question. But Micha says, yeah, thanks.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, in general, if a practice is working out great for you, then keep doing that.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, look, questions, more questions. That's really all I had in terms of presentation. So if there's anything else.
So maybe I'll just
I don't know how to okay.
Oh yeah.
Cool. There we go. Hi.
Awesome. Great to see you again.
Welcome back, Dina.
Thank you. I know I didn't see anyone's faces there for a while.
Those are great questions, actually.
Yeah, really good questions.
Yeah. Is there any other questions?
I guess I had some. So I just got the last pouch of Napoleon. I think it's B54. You stopped producing that strain, right?
B64 Napoleon we still have. We don't have the monastic.
Yeah, monastic is the one we don't have.
Yeah. B63 monastic and B51 workhorse did leave our core lineup a little while.
I think then it was monastic, because I think I got a pouch of those, and I was just about to brew a Belgian strong golden ale with it.
Nice.
Not sure how it goes, but yeah.
Let us know how it turns out. That sounds great.
Definitely.
It's definitely a great strain, but we're also making a little bit more room to invite some Kvike strains to join us. And we do have a good number of Belgian strains that can really kind of fit the profile for most of those styles. So we had to mix it up a little.
So you're planning on releasing more Kvike strains, I guess, which is something I really like.
Yeah, we did add that A44 Kviking that was a seasonal, and there was just so much demand for it that we had to add it as a core strain. So that was a really good move. We're really happy to hear the results that people have been having with that blend. And then the seasonal right now is the A37 Pog, which is another Kvike strain. So we have that through this month. Have you been able to use that strain yet?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
So Kviking, yeah, I used it like 3 times now.
Nice.
The first time was for a homebrewing class, which was very spontaneous. We brewed a pale ale with Motueka, which really, really was one of the greatest beer that we brewed so far. It was like really, really fruity with that lime from the Motueka and the tropical fruits from the Kviking. It was a great beer, and it started fermenting like in under an hour. It was mind blowing. And I also did a kettle sour, or no, not a kettle sour, rather a quick sour. So I pitched a lactobacillus blend and Kviking. I made a 1 liter starter, and then I added like 6 kilograms of strawberries, 1 kilogram of lactose, and 1 kilogram of rhubarb to it. And it was our summer fest beers for our like party for the employees at Hopfenmeer. It was also really nice. And the last beer that I did was a collab with a friend. We brewed a New England triple IPA with 20 Plato, and it fermented out to about 9.5%, I guess. Yeah, 70%, 78% attenuation. Yeah.
I want that
good.
strawberry, that rhubarb.
I know. It's like, that sounds so
How
good.
do I fly over there and do that?
Just bottle some and send it our way.
Yeah, actually, I just got the last bit of it on tap right now here in my teaser. So
no need to brag. I just want to taste
I know.
I'm sorry, but maybe if I can make it next year to HomebrewCon, maybe I can bring some over.
I'll be looking out for it.
We got some another 2 questions here from Bernd and Micha. If you would start a brewery and you could only have 3 strains, and you would want to be as versatile with beer styles as possible, which 3 strains would you choose? That's a good question.
That is a good question. I was
3.
like,
okay. So is that, well, I guess, is this question for me or is this for anyone else?
I think for both of you, right?
Well, first of all, okay, so if we're doing 3 strains, let's say that we had a lager strain, an ale strain that was going to be most versatile. And then, yeah, David should answer this too. Well, I'll start with 2 because that's all I can think of right now. But for a lager strain, I think the most versatile is the L17 Harvest because it is so low sulfur, low diacetyl producing. You can really, if you wanted to load up your pitch rate, you could do some bigger lager styles with that. And it would turn out awesome. I'm going to say for ale strain, I mean, A07 Flagship is a really easy one, but it's the underdog, I think, A38 Juice that is underutilized in terms of people mostly using it for hazy or New England style IPAs. It's actually an incredibly versatile English strain. So you can throw it at more malt forward styles. I've had some really great ESBs, some porters, some stouts, reds, hazy IPAs, clear IPAs. It's a really awesome, versatile strain to work with in-house. So those would be a lager and an ale. What else should I be thinking of, Liz?
I pretty much I was along the same lines. I was like, I'm definitely having a lager because I need that. And I was thinking L17 is the most versatile. Yeah, A07 is a great strain. That'd be a tough one. I do like the A38 as well, but I think I would lean probably in more on the A07 personally, just because I've had a lot of beers come out of it that I just really, really enjoy. But although A38 is kind of the same, it's just a hard toss-up between those 2.
Yeah.
Because the A38, I think a lot of people don't consider how versatile it is, which is, I want more people to experiment more than just hazy IPAs with it. Because there's definitely a lot of breweries who use that as their house strain and cranking out a lot of really great beers. And you would think that they were just brewing, some people would think that they were just brewing a bunch of hazies, but they're actually doing a lot of styles over the board. And I actually hear about a lot of people giving us feedback on, I'm always excited to hear someone say that they brewed something other than a hazy with A38. Let's put it that way. It is a great strain for a hazy IPA. So I can see why people do it. But I always am more curious to hear about the other beers that someone's brewed with A38 and comparing them. But as far as like a third strain, it would, I'm like
A43 Loki, actually, because you have such a range where you could go super low on the fermentation temperature and have something very pseudo lager. You could do something mid-range and have it be very like Saison farmhouse style, or you could crank it up and have something very ester forward for an IPA. So yeah, I've heard of A43 Loki being a house strain for breweries as well. So
yeah, I think I would, if I was my brewery, I would obviously have the staples of a lager and an ale, but I probably would lean in on a lot of farmhouse styles personally. So I'm kind of thinking around the Saison strains or something a little bit funky, because I love like I love a little tart and acidity, and I just love farmhouse beers. Like, you can get a table saison, or you can get something that's a little bit punchy or add some fruit. So I don't know, maybe I'd be like a really cool rustic farmhouse brewery, but with like a really kick-ass lager and some other versatile stuff. But I lean in on the funky stuff. So maybe that's my brewery idea for now. And it will change because it always does. But right now, I think I want a farmhouse brewery.
I want to hear.
Actually, a friend of mine has one over in Münster. So that's a long travel for me. But I've been helping him in the brewery on my vacation, actually. It's crazy, and he's just like he brewed also a pseudo lager recently with a Kveik, and it turned out like really, really clean. And yeah, so when I would choose 3 yeast strains, I also would go for L17 because I've been brewing. It was actually my first strain that I picked up from you guys last year.
Cool.
Yeah, and it really made nothing but only good beers, and so that's definitely a no-brainer to get this one in the brewery. And the second one would be probably Kveiking, because the majority of my beers that I brewed this year were fermented with Kveiks, and I just love everything about them. When you just like know how to handle them, they really deliver you a very nice beer in a like fraction of the time a normal fermentation would take. And also I really like the flavor profile of most of the Kveik strains. And the third strain, yeah, that might be a tricky one, but I guess I would go for Pub, because Pub is also like a really nice strain.
Yeah, Pub is nice.
I did a Maris Otter Fuggle Smash Ale with it. Just fermented at room temperature, like 20 C or something, and it really was a very, very nice beer. It just like had 3% ABV, so like really, really low, but it was super delicious and very clear. So yeah, nice. Very bright. Love that one.
Yeah. It's a bright strain.
Yeah, feisty little strain, but a nice one.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now this is all this beer talk.
More questions?
Beer.
Ooh, let's see. Oh yeah, the Kveik strain one. We were just kind of talking about this. The question is, if you're fermenting a Kveik strain around 65 to 70 degrees, or what is going to be kind of the lower limit for most of those strains. And 65 to 70 degrees is generally, you can ferment any Kveik strain at that. You'll definitely yield some gentler ester profile. You're not going to have as much of that big fruit bomb as you would with the higher temperatures. But it might be a little bit slower for some strains. I think if you have A43 Loki, I'm pretty sure that temperature range is between 65 and 100 degrees. And I think our Kveiking is kind of in the upper 70s and 80s we recommend, but that's mostly in respect to what kind of flavor profile you're going to get. So if you have to be fermenting between 65 and 70, you should be good to go. And then sulfur in lagers, having a little think of what kicks out sulfury. L13 Global, such a great classic strain, the Weihenstephan equivalent. It can get a little bit sulfury, especially earlier on. Of our lineup, that's probably the one. If you like that little sulfur edge, then you'll have the best results with it. Oh no, did we lose David? Come back, David.
We lost him.
We lost him. That's fine. We can run this ourselves, right?
Yeah, totally.
Well, if we have any other questions for us.
Yeah, feel free to pop those in there.
Yeah.
And we'll keep answering.
And if anything, too, we're always available to answer questions by email. David has our contact info. And so if you wake up in the middle of the night with a burning question and it can't wait, feel free to shoot us an email. We're always happy to answer any of those. That goes to you, Veronica. I know you've got some burning yeast questions.
Yeah, if you just can't wait.
Wow.
There he is. He's back.
Thank you.
I don't know what the heck happened.
It's okay.
What the fuck?
They hold their own.
Okay,
Right,
but
we took over.
you covered it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got those answered. We were just saying that if no one has any other questions at this particular moment, we're always reachable by email and always happy to answer anything either directly through us or through customer service on our website. There's a lot of ways to contact us.
Awesome. Well, then thanks a lot for the time that you took on this Friday morning, I have to say, because it's like around noon or something.
Yeah, just afternoon.
Yeah, it's great. It's during the day.
I'm like,
I'm a whole human right now. It's great.
Yeah.
All right, I think I'm gonna enjoy myself now with a triple fruited gose with
I know.
strawberry.
I literally, I was just saying when we lost you, I was like, all this beer talk. I'm like, I have a couple of beers. I'm like, well, it's you. So,
yeah, maybe.
One open. I have a gose in the fridge too that I'm.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Perfect for hot weather conditions, right?
Look, and it looks like a couple people are also drinking.
Yay.
Great.
Awesome.
All right. I hope to see you soon. It was a great time having you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And thanks for everything. So see you soon.
Yeah.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.